Everyone at Camp Ironclad thought she was just a charity case, someone too soft, too fragile for the brutal life reserved for the nation's fiercest soldiers. Day after day, she endured the sneers, the backhanded comments, the endless humiliation. No one knew her story. No one knew who she really was. But when the roar of a military helicopter shattered the sky and a decorated general stepped out, walking straight toward her with a look that could silence a battlefield, everything changed. In an instant, the sun at Camp Ironclad was relentless, beating down on the gravel paths and shimmering off the rows of barracks lined like soldiers themselves. Dust kicked up with every step, clinging to uniforms, boots, and skin. For Elena Brooks, it was more than just the heat or the dirt. It was the weight of unseen eyes, the whispers that followed her like an unwelcome shadow. She walked with her head down, clutching the cleaning supplies tighter against her chest. The ragged mop she carried dragged against the ground, leaving a thin, sad trail of moisture that evaporated within minutes. It was the only real trace she left behind. At Camp Ironclad, Elena was invisible, except when she was not. Someone laughed. Behind her, a short, cruel burst. "Better hurry up, Cinderella. Floors do not scrub themselves," a voice called out. Elena did not respond. She had learned quickly that answering back only made things worse. She moved faster instead, her sneakers scuffing awkwardly on the hot concrete. Her uniform was not like theirs. Hers was plain, gray utilitarian, missing the badges and insignias that everyone else wore like battle trophies. She was civilian support staff, technically. In reality, she was treated more like the camp mascot, or worse, the camp ghost. When she first arrived, Elena thought she would be able to blend in, keep her head down, do the work, and survive the few months she had promised herself she would endure. But this place was not built for soft hearts or quiet mouths. It was a machine, and anyone who could not keep up was crushed underfoot. They did not know why she was there. They made up their own stories instead. Some said she was a runaway, paying off some secret debt. Others joked that she was part of a new experimental program, train the weaklings to make soldiers look even stronger. Whatever the stories were, none of them were true. But Elena did not correct them. She had her reasons for staying silent. Reasons she replayed in her head every time the laughter cut a little deeper. Every time someone accidentally knocked her cleaning cart over, scattering her meager tools across the mess hall floor. "You do not belong here," one of the officers had sneered at her during the first week, making no effort to lower his voice. You would not last 5 minutes in a real unit. Maybe he was right. Maybe Elena did not belong here. She was not a fighter. She did not have the sharp edges or the hardened gaze of the soldiers who called Camp Ironclad home. She was small, slim, with a quiet way about her that screamed outsider louder than any words could. Still, every morning Elena showed up. She scrubbed floors that would be filthy again within hours. She polished boots that marched over her without a glance. She served food in the mess hall, dodging sharp elbows and sharper tongues. She did it all without complaint, because she was not here to win their approval. She was here for him. They did not know that, of course. To them, Elena was nobody. To him, he was everything. And even though he had sworn to protect her, he had also sworn to keep his distance, at least for a little while longer. It had been part of the agreement. No special treatment, no easy outs. If Elena was going to survive Camp Ironclad, she had to do it on her own. Sometimes she wondered if he had asked too much of her. The camp itself was brutal. Situated far from any real civilization, it had been designed to push soldiers past their limits mentally and physically. Temperatures soared during the day and plummeted at night. Training drills ran from dawn until long after dark. Mistakes were punished with extra laps, extra drills, extra humiliation. No one got a free pass. Not even support staff, not even a woman whose hands shook every time she lifted a tray heavier than usual. Elena wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a smudge of grime on her already sunburned skin. She glanced up toward the training fields where squads were running drills, their bodies moving in perfect, brutal synchronization. They were everything Elena was not: disciplined, relentless, strong. And yet she stayed. She stayed even when the days blurred together in an endless loop of work and exhaustion. She stayed even when the nights were so cold she had to curl up in her narrow bunk and bite her lip to keep from crying. She stayed because she had made a promise and she would not break it. Still, sometimes when the loneliness clawed at her too sharply, she wondered if he even knew what she was going through. If he understood what it felt like to be so thoroughly unwanted, so mercilessly judged. In her heart, she knew he did. He had been through his own trials to get where he was. But knowing that did not make it easier. It did not make her hands stop trembling when another officer shoved a mop into her chest and barked at her to make herself useful. It did not make the bile stop rising in her throat when she heard the laughter echoing off the stone walls of the mess hall. Elena was tired. So tired. But she refused to quit. Because she knew that one day when the time was right, everything would change, and when it did, the people who looked down on her now would have no idea what hit them. The days turned into weeks, each one harder than the last. Elena became a routine part of the camp's landscape, another object to be overlooked, like the battered flagpole or the cracked asphalt. She carried herself carefully, speaking only when necessary, never stepping out of line. But even her silence seemed to provoke them. Sometimes it was small things. Trays, accidentally, spilled onto the floor. Orders barked at her in front of. Others, just loud enough to draw stares and smirks. Other times it was more direct. "You are never going to make it," one soldier, Vargas, said, as she tried to fix a jammed laundry chute behind the barracks. His voice was casual, but his words carried the same weight as a slap. "You are too soft. You should leave before this place breaks you." Elena kept her eyes on her work, pretending she did not hear him. She repeated the mantra in her mind that had gotten her this far. "This is not forever. You are stronger than they think." But the cracks were beginning to show. That night, alone in the utility closet she had converted into a makeshift resting spot, Elena let herself cry. Silent tears pressed into her sleeves so no one would hear. She hated feeling this way. Weak. Helpless. She hated that they had this power over her. What would he say if he saw her like this? Probably nothing. He would just look at her with those steady eyes and remind her why she was here. She had agreed to this because she wanted to understand his world. She wanted to be strong enough to stand beside him, not just in the polished moments, but in the messy, brutal ones too. She had begged for this chance even when he warned her that it would not be easy. Now she was living the reality of that decision. The next morning, she pulled her hair back tighter than usual and tied her boots so hard the laces bit into her fingers. She pasted a calm expression on her face and headed back into the lion's den. The humiliation that day was worse than normal. During morning drills, she had been ordered to clean the outer training grounds, a task that involved hauling heavy buckets of water back and forth under the scorching sun. The soldiers in training ran past her in perfect formation, their boots thudding in rhythm, their shouts sharp and powerful. Elena, struggling with sloshing buckets almost as heavy as herself, was a sad contrast. One recruit, Fletcher, she remembered his name, deliberately kicked up a spray of mud as he passed by, soaking her pants and sleeves. "Oops," he said, not even pretending it was an accident. His buddies laughed, not bothering to hide it. Elena froze for a moment, the icy water seeping into her shoes, the sting of humiliation burning brighter than the sun overhead. She could feel the pressure of tears, threatening to break free, but she swallowed them down. Instead, she picked up the bucket, turned her back on them, and kept moving. That night, as she scrubbed the mess hall floors long after most of the camp had gone to sleep, Elena caught sight of herself reflected in a pane of glass. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Her face was thinner, her eyes sharper. There was a stubborn set to her jaw now that had not been there when she arrived. She was still tired, still hurting. But there was something else now too, something harder. She was changing, and maybe, just maybe, she would come out of this stronger than she ever imagined. The next few days tested that resolve to its limits. Someone slashed her mop head with a knife and left it on her cleaning cart for her to find. Another morning, she discovered her only set of spare clothes dumped into the latrine. No one said a word, but she could feel the smug satisfaction radiating from the soldiers who watched her as she fished them out with shaking hands. There were moments when she was tempted to walk away, to call him, to ask for rescue. But she remembered his words from the night before she left. "You are braver than you know, Elena. You will want to quit. Do not. Prove to yourself that you can do this, not for me, for you." So she stayed. Every day she found small ways to survive. She patched up her ruined mop with makeshift cloths. She bartered an extra set of boots from an old supply sergeant in exchange for helping organize the back storerooms. She learned how to spot the signs when someone was setting a trap for her, and how to sidestep it without giving them the satisfaction of reacting. The soldiers noticed the change, even if they did not say it aloud. Their jokes became sharper, their pranks crueler. They wanted to break her before she proved something they did not want to see, that someone like her could outlast them. And then came the day that would change everything. It started like any other. A dull, gray morning heavy with mist. Elena was cleaning the loading dock when she heard it, the unmistakable thump, thump, thump of helicopter blades slicing through the sky. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Helicopters were rare at Camp Ironclad. The camp was too remote, too forgotten. If someone important was arriving, it meant something. The soldiers paused too, looking up, shielding their eyes against the rising dust. There was a buzz of speculation in the air. Was it a visiting general? A surprise inspection? A new commanding officer? The chopper circled once, then began its descent toward the makeshift landing pad on the far side of the training fields. Soldiers scrambled to form ranks, standing at attention. Elena stood off to the side, clutching the mop handle so tightly. Her knuckles turned white. The helicopter touched down in a roar of wind and grit. For a moment, everything was chaos. Then the door opened, and out stepped the man she had been waiting for. The man who was about to change everything. General Nathaniel Brooks. Her husband. For a few heartbeats, there was only silence. General Nathaniel. Brooks stood tall, the crispness of his uniform sharp against the hazy backdrop of the misty morning. His chest bore medals that shimmered under the weak sunlight, and his boots made precise, deliberate steps across the gravel as he approached the assembled ranks. Every soldier on that field stiffened, eyes straight ahead, jaws clenched. It was not every day that a figure like him graced a forgotten place like Camp Ironclad. Elena stood frozen near the edge of the dock, half hidden behind a supply crate, her pulse roaring in her ears. She knew she should look away, pretend she had no idea who he was. That was the plan, after all. That had been the deal. No special treatment, no easy out. But Nathaniel's gaze swept across the camp, and when it landed on her, it stopped. For a moment he did not move. His face gave nothing away. To anyone else he looked like he was assessing a poorly maintained base, nothing more. But Elena could feel the shift in the air. She dropped her gaze quickly, but it was too late. Others noticed. Whispers began to ripple through the lines. Nathaniel turned toward the camp commander, a grizzled man named Colonel Reeves, who snapped into a rigid salute. "Sir, welcome to Camp Ironclad. We were not informed of your arrival." Nathaniel's voice cut cleanly through the rising murmur. "At ease." His words were low, but they carried weight, silencing even the boldest of the soldiers. "I am here for a personal inspection," he continued. Unannounced visits tend to reveal more about a camp's true character. Colonel Reeves swallowed hard, nodding tightly. "Of course, sir." Nathaniel's boots clicked against the concrete as he began to walk. Not toward the administration buildings, not toward the parade lines, but straight toward the loading dock, straight toward her. Elena's heart twisted painfully. Her fingers fumbled uselessly with the mop, her throat tight with panic. What was he doing? This was not part of the plan. He was supposed to maintain the illusion, keep his distance. He stopped in front of her, The silence was deafening. Every eye was on them now, the entire camp holding its collective breath. Nathaniel looked down at her, his face still composed, but his voice, when it came, was low enough that only she could hear it. "Have they been treating you well?" Elena's mouth went dry. She opened it, then closed it again. She could not lie. Not to him. Slowly, she shook her head. A shadow crossed Nathaniel's face, brief, almost imperceptible, but Elena saw it. She saw the quiet rage in his eyes. He turned sharply to Colonel Reeves, who had gone pale. "Gather everyone," Nathaniel commanded. Now. Within minutes, the entire camp was assembled on the training fields. Rows and rows of soldiers stood at attention, their faces a mixture of confusion, curiosity, and growing dread. Nathaniel stood before them, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture one of complete, effortless authority. "You have all been tested here," he said, his voice carrying easily across the field. "You have endured harsh conditions, brutal training, and relentless discipline. That is what this camp was built for." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But somewhere along the way, some of you have forgotten the most important lesson of all: respect." Murmurs stirred through the ranks. Nathaniel's gaze swept over them, cold and unflinching. "You see, among you has been someone I hold in the highest regard, someone I trusted to endure your trials without special treatment. Someone stronger than most of you could ever hope to be." He pointed without ceremony toward Elena. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "This woman," Nathaniel said, "is my wife." The shock was palpable. Jaws slackened, backs stiffened, soldiers exchanged frantic, disbelieving glances. "And you have treated her like nothing," Nathaniel continued, his voice hardening. "You humiliated her. You disrespected her. You revealed more about your own character than you ever realized." Colonel Reeves looked like he might faint. Several soldiers looked ready to bolt. Vargas and Fletcher, standing near the back, turned visibly pale. Elena felt a wave of heat wash over her, not from the sun, but from the raw electric charge in the air. Nathaniel took another step forward, his voice dropping into something colder, sharper. "You trained your bodies here, but you failed to train your hearts. In the field, it is not strength alone that saves lives. It is loyalty. It is integrity. It is respect for the ones who stand beside you, no matter how they appear on the surface." He let the silence stretch again, his eyes pinning each soldier in place. "Consider this your final lesson at Camp Ironclad. One you will not forget." Then, without another word, Nathaniel turned back to Elena. He extended his hand to her openly in front of everyone. A simple gesture, but it felt like a thunderclap. Her hands shook slightly as she placed hers in his. Together they walked across the field, through the stunned ranks of soldiers who parted like a sea around them, too shocked, too ashamed to meet her eyes. When they reached the helicopter, Nathaniel helped her inside with the quiet care he had always shown her. The rotors began to spin, the dust rising again in thick, choking clouds. Elena glanced out the window as the helicopter lifted off. Below, the soldiers of Camp Ironclad stood rigid, still and utterly silent, watching them rise into the sky. Elena leaned back against the seat, letting the noise and the chaos fall away. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe, and for the first time in her life she felt like she truly belonged, not because someone gave her a place, but because she had earned it. The helicopter soared higher, carrying them away from Camp Ironclad, from the dust and the sweat and the cruelty Elena had endured. But as the landscape fell away beneath her, she did not feel triumphant. She felt raw, exposed. Nathaniel sat beside her, his hand resting gently over hers, anchoring her in place. He said nothing at first, giving her the space to process everything. His silence was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that spoke of deep understanding. When he finally did speak, his voice was low and steady. "I am proud of you." The words hit her harder than she expected. Tears welled up in her eyes. Again, Not the bitter, helpless ones she had cried alone in the dark, but tears of release, of acknowledgement. I did not think I could make it, she admitted, her voice cracking. There were days I wanted to quit. I almost called you so many times. Nathaniel turned toward her, his gaze steady. But you did not. Elena shook her head. The memory of every humiliation, every insult, every lonely night weighing heavily in her chest. No, I stayed because you were right. I had to prove it to myself, not just to them, not even to you, to me. Nathaniel's hand tightened around hers, a small, fierce gesture of pride. You are stronger than they will ever understand, he said. You always have been. For a long moment they sat there in the vibrating helicopter cabin, holding on to each other. The pilot gave them their privacy, his eyes fixed forward, pretending not to notice the emotion radiating between them. Finally, Elena leaned back and closed her eyes. Images from the camp flickered through her mind like an old film reel, the jeers, the slashed mop, the cold stares. And yet, interwoven with those memories were flashes of something else. The moments she had stood her ground, the moments she had fought to keep her dignity. She realized with a sharp, bittersweet clarity that Camp Ironclad had not broken her. It had forged her. When they landed at the regional base, sleek and polished compared to the gritty, forgotten outpost she had left behind, Elena felt almost disoriented. The clean uniforms, the respectful nods from officers, the sense of order, it all seemed surreal. Nathaniel led her through the corridors with quiet assurance, waving off salutes with a curt nod. Everyone they passed recognized him instantly, but few dared to approach. When they reached his private quarters, Nathaniel closed the door behind them and finally, let the stoic mask drop. He pulled her into his arms without hesitation, holding her tightly against him. Elena clung to him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. You were never meant to face that alone, he murmured into her hair. I should have come sooner. Elena pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face. No, she said firmly. You came exactly when you needed to. If you had come earlier, I would not have learned what I needed to learn. Nathaniel studied her for a moment, his lips pressing into a thin line. Then he nodded, understanding. You are right, he said softly. You are not the same woman who arrived there. Elena smiled, a small, tired but genuine smile. Good, she whispered. Because I never want to be her again. That night they sat together on the small balcony overlooking the base. Elena wrapped herself in one of Nathaniel's old jackets, the fabric heavy and comforting around her shoulders. They talked, for hours, about the camp, about the soldiers, about the things she had seen and felt. Nathaniel listened without interruption, never minimizing her pain, never offering hollow reassurances. He knew better. As the stars blinked awake in the sky, Elena felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had survived Camp Ironclad. She had survived herself. And now she could begin something new, not because she needed to prove anything anymore, but because she finally understood her own worth, her own strength. The next morning, Nathaniel received a report, an official apology from Colonel Reeves, followed by immediate orders for mandatory ethics retraining at Camp Ironclad. Disciplinary. Actions had already begun against several individuals, including Vargas and Fletcher. Elena felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was distant, almost muted. She did not need their punishment to heal. She had already taken back her own power. Later that day, Nathaniel arranged for her to visit a nearby village, a peaceful little town untouched by the harshness of military life. As they drove through, winding streets lined with colorful houses and bustling markets, Elena felt the tension she had carried for so long begin to lift from her shoulders. Children laughed as they chased each other through narrow alleyways. Vendors called out greetings in cheerful voices. The scent of fresh bread and wildflowers filled the air. It was simple, ordinary, and it was beautiful. Standing in the middle of a sunlit square, Elena turned to Nathaniel, her heart full. "I want to stay here for a while," she said. "Not forever, just long enough to remember who I was before and who I am now." Nathaniel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Whatever you need," he said. "Wherever you go, I will be right behind you." And she believed him. Because this time she did not need anyone to carry her, she could walk on her own. Looking back now, Elena often marveled at how easily strength could be mistaken for weakness and cruelty for toughness. Camp. Ironclad had taught her that in the most brutal way possible. For a long time after she left, she carried invisible scars. They would surface at the oddest moments. A certain tone in someone's voice, a glance that lingered a little too long, a sudden echo of harsh laughter. But those scars did not break her anymore. They reminded her of what she had survived, of who she had become. There were days when the memories would creep back, Vargas's sneer, the way Fletcher had tossed her gear into the mud, the cold indifference in so many faces. But instead of shrinking away from those memories, Elena learned to meet them head-on. Because every moment of humiliation, every lonely night spent curled up in a drafty barrack, had carved out a deeper resilience within her. She did not regret it, not a single moment. In the quiet village where she had chosen to stay for a time, life moved slower. Elena found work helping out at a local school, teaching English to eager, bright-eyed children who had never heard of things like hazing or hierarchies. Here, no one cared what rank you held or what medals you wore. Here, a kind word meant more than a sharp command. Some days Nathaniel would visit, flying in on weekends when he could get away from his endless responsibilities. He never tried to push her back into his world before she was ready. He understood that healing was not something that could be forced. In the evenings, they would sit by the small river that wound through the edge of the village, watching the fireflies dance above the water. They would talk about everything, and sometimes nothing at all. And slowly, Elena pieced herself back together, not as the woman she had been before the camp, but as someone stronger, someone who knew the weight of silence, someone who had walked through humiliation and held on to her dignity, someone who had faced the ugliest sides of people and chosen not to let it define her. One afternoon, months later, a letter arrived. It was from Colonel Reeves. The words were stiff, formal, but honest. An apology. Not just from him, but from the entire leadership of Camp Ironclad. Acknowledging the failure, the betrayal. Elena read it carefully, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. She did not need their apologies to find peace. But she accepted it anyway, not for them, but for herself. Because forgiveness was not about saying what had happened was right. It was about refusing to let anger tie her to that place any longer. As the seasons changed, so did Elena. She found herself smiling more easily, laughing without the heavy edge of bitterness she used to carry. One evening, sitting under the spreading arms of an old oak tree, Nathaniel turned to her and said, "You have always been the strongest person I know." Elena looked at him. The man who had seen her through her worst, who had believed in her when even she doubted herself. "I am strong because I had to be," she said softly, "but also because someone believed I could be." Nathaniel reached out and took her hand in his, twining their fingers together. "You never needed me to be strong," he said, "but I am grateful I got to see it. All of it." Elena squeezed his hand back, feeling the truth of that settle deep in her bones. Later that night, alone in her small room, Elena sat by the window, the warm breeze tugging at the thin curtains. She thought about the woman who had first arrived, at Camp Ironclad, nervous, determined, desperate to prove herself. She thought about the woman who had scrubbed floors until her hands bled, who had stood silently under jeering stares, who had cried herself to sleep more nights than she could count. And she thought about the woman who had stood tall when her husband reached out his hand in front of the entire camp, unashamed, unbroken, unbowed. All those women were her. All those pieces made up the whole of who she had become. And for the first time in her life, Elena was proud. Not just proud of what she had survived, but proud of who she was, without needing anyone else's permission to feel that way. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, Elena whispered into the night, a small, fierce promise to herself. I will never forget who I am again. And somewhere deep inside she knew, no matter what storms might come, no matter how harsh the world might become again, she would face it all with the same quiet, unbreakable strength that Camp Ironclad had tried, and failed, to tear away from her, because she had faced the worst they could throw at her, and she had walked away stronger.